All right, good afternoon, everyone. This is Jay Tahoe here. It's been a while since I've made a podcast while driving, but I thought that this was such a hot topic, in the media and the world that I'd, give my analysis of it as I'm driving today. So the topic that I wanted to talk about today is the Derek Chauvin murder trial. Highly publicized trial going on right now that it's of high public interest because it'll really see if we're holding police accountable, when they do their job incorrectly. Now, that's to say, I do want to say before I give my analysis that, in terms of, I know in the court of public opinion, Derek Chauvin is guilty of murder. Now, he still needs to be found guilty by 12 jurors in a court of law. But I thought what struck me from the get-go of this trial is that the state is charging Chauvin with manslaughter as well as second-degree murder and first-degree murder. And I think this was pretty smart because I do think from the testimony we've seen so far, and I'm going to get into that in a minute, that they will at the very least be able to convince the jury of manslaughter. Now, for murder, that's where they may run into some difficulty. Now, I know, we all saw the video, and it looked very to us, it looked very clear that he was trying to cause some type of harm. Now, remember, the burden of proof is on the prosecution. So for murder, they have to prove that there was a premeditated intent for Chauvin to kill George Floyd. So that they may run into some trouble establishing that intent because you not only need the actus reus, or the guilty act, you also need the mens rea, the guilty mind. Now, I think that being that this is a high stakes case, I don't know what they're doing to sequester the jury, to keep the jury from being influenced by outside people, or keep the jury from being badgered or threatened to deliver a certain verdict. What I do know is that when it comes to the manslaughter, I think from what we saw from the witnesses that were cross-examined this week, and we heard from the homicide sergeant Richard Zimmerman. We heard from John Edwards, who was Derek Chauvin's, who was a sergeant, in the same precinct. We'd heard from the 911 dispatcher Jenna Scurry. We heard from the off-duty firefighter Genevieve Hansen, who was a witness on scene, and we heard from MMA fighter Donald Williams, who was the one who was confronting Tutau while it was happening. So, but I think the most what really proved the manslaughter and what's going to really sell this jury, because again, I'm looking at this, I'm giving an analysis, like a court analysis, right? My opinion is relatively irrelevant, and to be honest, I think, yes, there needs to be some type of accountability for this. In my mind, as I analyze it, I think that the manslaughter has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt, and that's the whole thing is reasonable doubt. When Zimmerman was speaking about the training that officers receive about the prone position and specifically putting a knee on somebody's neck, and everybody, every person from the police department who's testified so far has said that there's no training scenario where you're ever taught to put your knee where an officer is ever taught to place their knee on someone's neck in the Minneapolis Police Department. They also talked about the prone position and how the prone position is only to be used to get somebody into handcuffs. So I think it's going to be interesting to see. I think a very important question, and what we need to see, and what the jurors need to see, is when the state inevitably asks, or the district attorney inevitably asks Chauvin when he testifies, if knowing that the prone position is only to be used to get somebody into handcuffs, and once they are in handcuffs, you're supposed to sit them back up as to not obstruct breathing. How come you left him in the prone position, let alone with your knee on his neck, for 9 minutes? and 49 seconds. And I think it'll be really, really important to see how Chauvin answers that question. I think Chauvin's testimony is going to be really, really important in all this too. He's been silent for nearly a year now, since May 25th, when this occurred. We haven't really heard. The only thing we've actually heard from Chauvin say is we heard that snippet of his phone call with his supervisor, who I believe was Sergeant Pluger, following the incident, and that's the only thing that we've heard of Chauvin. We need to hear his testimony. We need to see if there's any contrition, and if there is, if it's real contrition, or if he's just saying what his attorney coached him to say. I think that's going to be very important too. We don't know. We saw a video, and that was pretty damning. We heard the testimony from other police officers, as well as his direct sergeant, and that was pretty damning too. I think that at the very least, what it shows is that Chauvin did not act in the way he was trained to as a police officer. He did not follow the training. So at the very least, that establishes negligence, that he was negligent of his job duties, which, negligence is something you can prove for manslaughter, right? Because you don't need intent for manslaughter. You need to prove that there was neglectful intent, which I think that does prove beyond a reasonable doubt that, Chauvin would have a reasonable person in that situation would have no reason to believe it was okay to place the knee on the neck with him in the prone position. There's no training that ever stated to do that. And it's also been stated in training to only put somebody in the prone position to get the handcuffs on them, which we established, that the cuffs were already there. Now, Chauvin's lawyer, Mr. Eric Nelson, is trying to make several cases for Chauvin. The first being that Chauvin, had reason to believe that that he was in danger. Which in my mind is a pretty weak case, because we saw that he was in the handcuffs. Now the attorney stated that, sometimes suspects can use the cuffs against the officer as a weapon if it wasn't locked all the way, or if the handcuffs failed. But I mean, everybody we saw multiple body cams in exhibits published by the state that the handcuffs were clearly on and secured, and that the level of threat had gone down. And also the Richard Zimmerman testified that once you have a suspect, once they have been handcuffed, and he'd already been patted down, as we saw in the video, that there was no reason to believe that he was in danger, and it certainly wouldn't justify deadly physical force, which again, he testified that placing a knee on somebody's neck, which can obstruct an airway, is. Now, the other crux of Nelson's argument for Chauvin is that there was fentanyl in George Floyd's system. Now, this is where the testimony of several witnesses comes into play, such as George Floyd's former girlfriend, Courtney Ross, who stated that both of them had struggled with opioid addiction for years, and that a person who's addicted to opioids like that would have a much stronger tolerance than an average person. So what I think the testimony that we hear in the coming weeks from the expert witnesses, the doctors, the coroners, and there's going to be a few of them, the toxicologists and so forth, that will be very, very important in determining the cause of death. Because again, it's hard to say, right? Like, we know there was fentanyl in his system when the coroner did the autopsy. But we don't know, would that have happened had Chauvin not placed his knee on the neck? And my analysis of it is no. Like, it was Chauvin's knee that directly caused his death. But we need to hear from medical experts on that. And that's going to be very, very crucial in establishing to the jury the cause of death. And if it can be proven that was in fact the cause of death, then was it intentional? What was Chauvin's intent? So I think this is going to be a really, really interesting week of testimony that we hear here coming up. So I'm staying tuned. I'm gonna, I will probably make another video as we go, depending on when this trial ends. I think you guys would probably want to ask, well, what would, if you had to guess what the verdict will be, what would you predict? And that's a hard question, honestly. I think that he will definitely be found guilty of manslaughter. I'll say that right now. I think he will definitely be found guilty of manslaughter. And, I think the prosecution has already, even without delivering closing arguments, I think they've already established that beyond a reasonable doubt. For the murder 1 and 2 charge, I don't know. I think that's going to be very, very dependent on the upcoming testimony from the medical experts, as well as Chauvin's own testimony. I think that, what he says when he's asked why he handled the situation the way he did, which he's going to be asked, is going to be very crucial. And like I said, we haven't heard from him, since it happened. So that's going to be very interesting, to say the least. I hope that justice is served. I hope that the jury does make the right call. I think we need to we're not done hearing the evidence. I think we need to hear all of the evidence. And I hope that whatever happens, I hope the public, whichever way it goes, if he's found guilty or not guilty, is accepting of the verdict, right? Because again, this is why we have a court system. And to be clear, I'm neither defending Chauvin nor saying, oh, he's definitely guilty. As I said, I do believe he is at the very least guilty of manslaughter and quite possibly murder. But again, that's we need to hear the upcoming evidence and put yourself in the mind of the juror, right? And listen to all the evidence. And this is why we have the justice system, so that we can make the right call. We can hear out all the evidence. We can piece it together. We can weigh that evidence, and establish guilt or not guilt. But that's my analysis on the trial so far. I will definitely make another analysis on the topic, and you guys let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Take care, everyone.